we then wouldn't be incorporating anymore officially. We would just be incorporating, they would just be incorporating by reference without updating the plan in the future. And now you're telling me that's not what's intended by the language that's there. And so there's some communication issue, both with the response to comments, I think, and with where we are right now that we may need to clarify.
I think maybe the specific question for the board, for the regional board, is what is your plan with respect to updating the basin plan in the future if the state board amends one of its existing plans or policies? Are you just going to let it slide because it says we're incorporating future revisions, so we're not going to take the time to describe what those future revisions are? Or are they going to come back eventually, as they do currently, and update the description of those existing plans and policies?
And the plan would be really to not change the practice we've had, which is every few years, as new policies are adopted, which are not referenced in the plan, changes are made to existing policies, agency name changes, water code number changes. When those build up to a critical level, we will do the same non-substantive edits and updates that we have before you today. So it's not going to be that we will never come back and address these issues, because all those other reasons for doing these edits and updates will still be existing. We would not be, and we never have, done a basin plan amendment to follow up on every time the state board has adopted a specific change to a policy. Again, something like the OTS policy, it's a new policy. We did a basin plan amendment. There were some things there were choices we had to make as a regional board on that. In addition, we don't have anything that automatically incorporates it. So when we go through those policies, and we were going through the basin plan process for the OTS policy, so we basically piggybacked on, and it's a separate, technically a separate action, but you're dealing with the same stakeholder process, same meetings, so it's more efficient just to do the edits and updates. At the same time, you're moving through with some other action. So our intent is not to change our practice of every few years cleaning up the basin plan. All this does is say that when the state board changes, basically puts people on notice that these things aren't static. The state board can be changing these things. And we are going to be enforcing whatever the most current version of the state board's policies are.
One thing, or just to enhance the discussion, you could think of it, in the modern basin plan. If you want to go see what it says, what are you going to do? You're going to go online, and then you're going to have a link in the online basin plan that refers to a state board policy. Okay, when you click on that link, it's going to bring up the most recent version of the state board policy. It's real time. But the basin plan update process, the historic one, was, actually you have to put the link to the old one, because that was the old state policy. And so what this innovation does, that Betty Yee has come up with, and she's come up with a lot of innovations, because I know that from the basin plan roundtable experience. This is an innovation in my mind. Because what it does is
take credit for this one.
But you recognize that the perspective language on the OTS policy, that I heard you, was that this will incorporate future changes. Operationally, a stakeholder goes to our website and looks, okay, what are the applicable policies? You'll have the link there, you'll click it, and if we updated the OTS policy in 2014, that update will be there, it will be relevant, and the basin plan will be relevant. So I respect Mr. Thomas's concerns. I think we've really shown that new policies have to go through a process of seeing how it applies in the basin plan. Each of the 9 regions and some 11 basin plans, I forget. And so what we're doing is this is a customer service based approach is what is proposed before us. Because what it does is it makes it so that the stakeholder goes to the website, clicks up the latest version that's legally applicable, and that's what Mr. Thomas wants, is a relevant, real-time basin plan, and that's what this proposal does in my mind, with my experience doing basin planning, just for what it's worth.
That helpful? That sounds helpful to me.
It is very helpful. Phil had the question, and Ken gave
the answer we were hoping to get that is not incorporated or clarified
Right.
in the amendments, because we read the amendments as we won't have to visit this again because we've already done it in 2014 and it covers anything, and we're not going to change basin plans, you know, forever. If they stay with the same process, you know, that's fine, but the words didn't take you there. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Phil, is there anywhere we can clarify this in the record today so that it's clear? You feel it's clear in the language, you just disagree with Mr. Thomas in how you read it.
Well, not exactly. Actually, in terms of the language, I think we're all on the same page that it only affects existing plans and policy of the state board. You know, I'd be happy to be wrong about this, but I don't think there's anything in the existing amendment before the board that says one thing or another about whether the past practice will continue. And one could read it, as Mr. Thomas did, as suggesting that perhaps this reflects a change in practice. So if you want to give me a minute or two, I could.
Yeah,
I
could you
do
just
something,
come up
sure.
with something so that we can say it somehow
Okay.
to memorialize the conversation? Just because you never know when a comet may strike and we're not here anymore to remember.
You know, again, I think they've narrowed it to when a basin plan already refers to a state plan. And in this case, they've updated that. You know, the triennial review, every 3 years, the regional boards update the language like they did here. And I really support, by the way, because that keeps these basin plans relevant. So all that's before us is that for those items that are in the basin plan already, that prospective changes by the state board are incorporated. Anything new has to go, you know, before the regional board in full public process. So this language only pertains to existing policies that are within the base, that are state board policies that are referenced in the basin plan. Am I right?
It only applies to the policies that we had added. It actually, we don't even have that language. We didn't amend the basin plan to add that to every single policy that we already had in the basin plan even. And perhaps in the future, we should add that, or maybe in the future, we shouldn't add that.
But yes, it only applies to the ones that are in the Central Valley Basin Plan, or the Tulare Lake Basin Plan.
Right.
The
Right.
one under discussion.
Good. And that have been duly adopted by the state board.
Correct.
Well, I think clarity is helpful. You understand it, you did basin plans. You're like an insider. Seriously. I mean, there's been enough confusion here. The response to comments didn't explain it. Betty and I have already had a conversation about that. That's the point of response to comments. If you have a different interpretation, then somebody has something in writing that clarifies it as opposed to a trust me. Do you think you have something? Oh, and we can take our morning break now if you...
I have something if you'd like to
Yeah.
hear it. This would just be a sixth paragraph in the recitals, a new number 6. And it would just say, the Central Valley Water Board intends to continue its practice of updating its basin plan from time to time to reflect future amendments to state water board plans and policies.
Thank you, Mr. Wells. I move for adoption of this item with the language Mr. Wells just read into the record.
If I can interject one moment, I just realized there's a executive officer correction,
Yes.
and so the motion should, if the board's amenable to it, to include approving the water quality control plan amendment with the executive officer amendment.
So moved.
Second.
Great. All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. Carrie, thanks for the conversation. Thank you, guys. Good to see you.
Yes.
All right.
And Ken, we'll have to find another reason to pull you back here before November. Because this was so fun. We must do it again.
I could do without the honor. Thank you.
Congratulations.
November what?
2-0.
20. Okay.
Was that 20? Sweet.
As in 2020?
2014.
Item number 6.
This item is our monthly drought update, and John O'Hagan and Jim Mon will be presenting today.
Good morning. My name is John O'Hagan, Assistant Deputy Director for the Division of Water Rights, and I'm going to give the first update dealing with curtailments. As the board members have discussed, this has been an important issue. The state water staff continues to update its websites and all the curtailment areas on a daily basis instead of the monthly basis that we used to use, tracking the stream flow data, full natural flow, and the demand.
Great.
As expected, the September demand is dropping from water diversions, and we are monitoring that. On August 30th, the executive director issued a notice to rescind curtailments for 21 post-1914 water rights on the Van Dusen River. This was based on the fact that demand was declining in both August and September, and all the demand was upstream of the gauge we were monitoring. So the flows we monitored were consistent, and the curtailment was ordered. Field inspections continue throughout the curtailed watersheds. We are focusing in on non-responders, but we will be revisiting some of the inspected sites that we have visited previously to confirm that pumping has not commenced. We are scheduling a workshop for September 24th. This workshop is being held to receive and discuss public comments on the most effective process available to the board to address the recent allegations and legal issues related to the source and quantity of water supplies for diversion in the central and southern delta. As you recall, a letter from the U.S. Bureau of Reclamation and Department of Water Resources alleged potential unauthorized diversions, use of stored water in the southern and central delta. We received several subsequent letters regarding that, presenting legal theories in this. Staff has talked with stakeholders, and they were in favor of having this workshop on process. As a part of the workshop notice, there is a draft order consistent with our emergency regs, and we are asking stakeholders whether this proposed draft order is consistent and ask the right questions for responses. Now, this is an information-only workshop. We are also doing additional outreach that is consistent with the board's resolution 2014-31 adopted on July 2nd regarding meetings with stakeholders in various watersheds to gather input from them concerning our implementation and enforcement of water right priorities. So we are scheduling meetings to meet with these stakeholders in order to get their input in case we need to continue curtailment in future dry years. The board's primary objective is to improve confidence in the technical tools and analysis that the State Water Board will use for making determinations of water availability related to water right priorities. As required, the executive director and staff will provide a report with recommendations to the board by January 31st, 2015. As far as temporary urgency changes and transfers, the State Water Board has not received any new petitions or transfers. However, we are still noticing and processing protests regarding the transfers and temporary urgency changes we have done. This concludes my presentation unless you have questions.
Yes. Could you give a sense on the plans to review curtailments with the idea toward lifting them on the various watersheds?
Yes, we are scheduling meetings with stakeholders regarding the rescission or lifting of curtailments based on incoming weather conditions and the demand, declining demand. So we are planning to meet in the near future with stakeholders on that direct issue. We have gotten several letters regarding requests to lift them now. As you can tell, we already have started the recension process in certain watersheds based on hydrology and demand. So we hope to get input from the stakeholders and utilize that information in a localized area by watershed.
Okay, thanks. And then any updates on enforcement actions?
We are still considering enforcement action in different areas. We are also considering some potential information orders. I can't speak further than that.
Thank you.
Yeah, sure.
I know we've received a number of letters about lifting the curtailment, particularly in areas where waterfowl who will be coming in the fall will be affected. Are you conferring with Fish and Game or Fish and Wildlife on that? And how are you handling that? Or are you handling that any differently than you would any other curtailment lifting request?
In particular areas where we've done inspections on the request for lifting curtailments in an area that has a refuge, we had found that the refuges were still being served by contract water. So, and then a lot of the other diverters were also exercising other rights, our groundwater. So we would like to get more specific information regarding the impact that some of these facilities may be incurring. But yes, we are working with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and Fish and Wildlife to assess their water rights supply.
I would also comment in that regard that the drought operations plan that was adopted last April, I think, specifically said that there wouldn't be provision for rice flooding water for waterfowl because of its impact on carryover storage, either from the State Water Project or Central Valley Project. And at least at the time, the fishery agencies concurred with that. We, of course, meaning times change, and we're tracking this on a real-time basis. So I can't say what the final disposition of all the requests might be, but that is at least the decision that was made in the spring.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. O'Hagan. Especially, I'm interested in the inspections and pleased to hear that they're ongoing, and also interested in the criteria used to help select where to inspect, given the broad range of what we're dealing with. Do you ever use complaints as a basis to do inspection? Because you mentioned non-responders and then going back, which is a good strategy to make sure that the diversion doesn't just kick in after we leave. But have complaints played a role in terms of selecting where to put our staff resources?
Absolutely. In addition to the curtailment process that we are doing, we have staff responding to complaints throughout the state dealing with potential unauthorized diversions, violations of terms and conditions, and then also injury to public trust resources. So we do have some surveillance going on in areas, and then also responses to complaints. So we do have resources in addition to the curtailment resources doing that activity.
That's good. I see a real customer service component to that, and so I appreciate that.
I have a question. I know you can't talk about active enforcement here, but I'm assuming that in some of the complaints you've gotten or the investigations you've gotten where you've showed up and people don't appear to be complying, you've gotten people to change behavior based on showing up.
I think the behavior was changed by voluntary because people planned ahead, and our field presence is definitely making a difference. The fact that we have been out there since June, and they know that a revisit is potential. However, I think the fact that a lot of these people are exercising alternative water supplies and have planned ahead made a big difference this year. So there's There's some violations, but I think, and I'm pleased to announce that we feel that there has been good voluntary compliance throughout the curtailed area.
Good. People know their water rights. That's good.
Good morning, Chair Marcus, board members. I'm
Have you
Jim.
found any new ways to get people to spend money to do good things? On
We're
behalf of the environment?
trying.
You're good at
We're
this.
really trying. Well, I want to report a little bit on the 5 funding areas that are drought-related that we're managing here at the board. As part of the governor's drought proclamation, the first one is the small disadvantaged communities wastewater projects. There was an advancement of $7 million. That money is all committed to projects and in signed agreements as of July of this year. So that is all out, so to speak, out the door. On the water recycling projects at 1%, you obviously remember the board approved that up to $800 million. The totals right now are 11 projects with just over $200 million for funding for those projects. Wanted to also mention here that we have now placed a table on the board website that shows where those projects are, what the status is, and we will update that every couple of weeks.
Oh, good.
So people can see what's going on with that. Now we have 2 cleanup and abatement funds. The first one I want to talk about is a $4 million in interim emergency drinking water. We have committed over $1.9 million to that, and currently have requests of about $1 million that we're processing of that $4 million. For the $2 million in cleanup and abatement funds for interim replacement drinking water, we've committed about $650,000 of funds to that, and currently have requests for an additional $1 million for that as well. So money is going out, projects are coming in. Last but not least, of the $15 million for the public water system drought emergency response, we have over $10 million that has been committed to projects, with an additional request for $1.3 million that's pending at this point in time. So that's my update.
That's
unless
great. Is there, and presumably we can see which communities and all of that stuff too to, I know anecdotally some of it, but not all of it. That would be good to know. And then presumably you're also working with the Department of Finance in the case that we get closer to those totals and they need to go back.
Correct, we are.
We're pretty far along on a lot of those. One thing you didn't point out, that was very comprehensive, thank you, is on the water recycling. You said we're committed on 11 projects for $200 million, which is about a quarter of the total, but you didn't mention what's pending. So are we looking at things, or it's sort of a down period? Because we got until December 2015, so
We do.
there's still 600 million, everyone out there in the web.
After still receiving calls, but until we get some part of an application. So I'm not reporting on the calls we're receiving, but at least some part of an application at this point in time.
Got it.
That's
They're
great.
bigger projects. They take a little bit longer to move forward.
Good. Any other questions? Thank you very much. Glad to have that part of the report as well. All right. Can we move on to item number 7? Does anybody want to take the break now? It's normal break time, but I'm happy to keep going. What? All right. Well, why don't we go on? Let's go to item number 7. No objection.
Item number 7 is consideration of a resolution approving an amendment to the Water Quality Control Plan for the Los Angeles region. It relates to a TMDL for pollutants in Marina Del
Thank
Rey
you very
Harbor.
much.
And we have Sam Unger, the executive officer of the Los Angeles Regional Board, here today, and he'll introduce his staff.
All right.
Hi,
I think we're
good morning.
settled. Good morning, Chair Marcus and members of the State Water Resources Control Board. For the record, I'm Samuel Unger, the Executive Officer of the Los Angeles Regional Water Quality Control Board. And with me today are Deborah Smith, the Chief Deputy Executive Officer, Renee Purdy, Chief of our Regional Program Section, Jenny Newman, Chief of our TMDL Unit, and Shana Rappaport, the Principal Environmental Scientist for the TMDL before you today. Also present are Region 4's Office of Chief Counsel Attorneys, Nicole Kinsey and Francis McChesney. And we appreciate the opportunity to present for your consideration revisions to a total maximum daily load for toxic pollutants in Marina del Rey Harbor. Marina del Rey is one of the largest small craft harbors in California, and its waters are impaired by a number of toxic pollutants, including dissolved copper. Before I turn the presentation over to Jenny Newman to discuss the revisions to the TMDL that were adopted by the Regional Board in February of this year and the outreach and coordination that we have done to address stakeholder concerns, I would like to just provide you with a brief bit of context for the item before you today. First, the item before you today is actually a reconsideration of a TMDL that was first adopted by the Regional Board in 2005 and subsequently approved by the State Board in 2006. That TMDL was focused on toxic pollutants conveyed via sediments that are discharged into Marina del Rey Harbor, principally through the municipal storm drain system. The 2005 TMDL focused on implementation of BMPs to address pollutant loading from the storm drain system and to also emphasize monitoring to support future considerations of the TMDL, one of which is before you today. Monitoring conducted under the 2005 TMDL confirmed what science tells us about harbors in the state of California, that not only are sediments contaminated in harbors in urban areas, but that the waters are also impaired by high concentrations of copper, much of which is loaded into the harbor waters through copper-based paints used on boat hulls. The 2005 TMDL contained a provision to reconsider the TMDL. The revisions before you today are the result of the special studies and monitoring that was conducted from 2005 to as late as earlier this year under the initial TMDL. Next slide, thank you. In reconsidering the TMDL, the Regional Board found that there are ample data and analysis that support the finding that copper discharge from anti-fouling paints used on boat hulls is impacting water quality. During the process of revising the TMDL implementation program to address the source of water quality impacts, the Regional Board evaluated and drew upon established regulatory programs elsewhere in Southern California, including those in Shelter Island, in San Diego, and in Newport Bay in Orange County. The Los Angeles Board took careful note of the experiences in the implementation and built upon these TMDLs. Specifically, the Board found that there are three core elements that are required to cost-effectively address the dissolved copper. The first is best management practices. We have learned much from the Port of San Diego, who is leading efforts in implementing the Shelter Island Yacht Basin TMDL. The Port of San Diego has worked closely with hull cleaners to institute a program whereby divers are trained in BMPs and issued identification cards, which are now required to perform hull cleaning work. The second element is the use of low copper-based paint or non-toxic coatings. We have worked with DPR, the University of California, and manufacturers to assess the feasibility of using this paint, and it is clear to us that industry is making these paints more and more available. And finally, the last element to effective implementation of a copper-based TMDL is the potential benefit from special studies using EPA methods, such as water effects ratios, and other methods which are currently under development now, such as the biotic ligand model, to determine whether site-specific objectives are appropriate to a particular water body. If such studies indicate that copper toxicity is lower than that observed in other water bodies, less stringent site-specific objectives could be established that would fully protect aquatic life while reducing implementation costs. The LA Board, as you know, has a strong record of revising its TMDLs in concert with new science and special studies that are undertaken by dischargers. As Jenny will explain, we have conducted extensive outreach on the TMDL revision, both prior to our board's action in February and prior to this hearing today. And I will add that the outreach is continuing as of up until this morning of today's hearing. We have made significant progress with some of the key stakeholders. The county has committed funding to undertake special studies, specifically water effects ratios, that can support determination of a site-specific copper objective. In return, we are suggesting language in the resolution before you today that will memorialize the regional board's commitment to consider the results of these special studies and revise the TMDL as appropriate. We have also reached agreement with the representatives of National Marine Manufacturers Association and the Marina Recreation Association, who are interested in pursuing a biotic ligand model study and are seeking our commitment to consider the results of this study. Again, we have included language in the resolution for your consideration that commits the regional board to consideration of the results of those studies. And as we've shared with you during briefings, we have met extensively with the anchorages and have made some non-substantive changes to the Basin Plan Amendment, which Jenny will explain, as well as adding findings to the resolution to address their concerns to the best of our ability. Even with these changes, up until yesterday, we have not been able to gain their support, but I understand that there were, again, some changes that went on later this morning. I don't know fully the status, but they may be at least in a position not to oppose the TMDL before you today. They will speak to you soon, I presume. So in summary, the regional board believes it has set forth a structure whereby the county, boat owners, and anchorages can all work together to find the most cost-effective manner to address the high levels of copper in Marina del Rey Harbor and return its waters to their full beneficial uses. And with that, I will turn it over to Jenny Newman to walk you through the issues and language that is before you today.
Great.
Thank you.
Marcus and board members. My name is Jenny Newman, and I'm with the TMDL unit at the Los Angeles Water Board. I'll first go over the order of my presentation to give you some orientation. First, I will review the TMDL background, the original TMDL adopted in 2005. Then I will discuss the major revisions that were adopted by the Los Angeles Water Board in February of this year. Then I'll discuss key information regarding the revisions. And finally, I will review the proposed additional language for the draft State Board resolution approving the Los Angeles Water Board action to address stakeholder concerns. The State Water Board received over 100 comment letters on this item. Detailed responses to all comments are available in your agenda packages, and they were posted to the State Board website. I'll cover the major issues brought up in the comment letters in my presentation. As background, Marina del Rey Harbor is one of the largest marinas in California. It contains 8 poorly circulated subbasins and houses a dense concentration of recreational boats, approximately 4,700 boats. The harbor receives runoff via the storm drain system that drains a small urbanized watershed. The watershed is approximately 2.9 square miles. The TMDL, the original TMDL, became effective in March of 2006. The original TMDL addressed water quality impairments in the sediment of the back basins. They're shown as basins E, D, and F on the slide. Data at the time showed that the sediments were contaminated with copper, lead, zinc, chlordane, and PCBs. The TMDL assigned allocations for these sediment-bound pollutants to stormwater discharges to the harbor. The 2006 TMDL also required stakeholders to conduct monitoring and special studies to address data gaps, and for the TMDL to be reconsidered based on those monitoring and special studies. After several years of monitoring, in February of this year, the LA Water Board adopted the following revisions. First, the monitoring data showed that the sediments throughout the entire marina were contaminated. So the geographical scope of the TMDL was extended beyond just the back basins to include the front basins as well. Second, The approach to the sediment impairments was revised to be consistent with more recently adopted TMDLs in our region, such as the Los Angeles and Long Beach Harbors TMDL, which the State Board approved in 2012. And third, data showed that dissolved copper concentrations in the water column exceeded water quality standards in 75% of the samples. The primary source of the dissolved copper is anti-fouling paint, which is applied to the hulls of boats moored in the marina to prevent the building of fouling organisms on the boats. The copper leaches out of the paint and into the surrounding water, and as a result of these new findings, the TMDL was revised to include a dissolved copper impairment and a corresponding load allocation for copper leaching from the hull paints. This has been the most contentious part of the TMDL, the addition of the copper TMDL, so I will focus my presentation on the copper portion. I'll now go over the key information regarding this new copper TMDL. The first item is that the Marina del Rey copper TMDL, excuse me, it's not a novel approach. It has the same requirements as other marina copper TMDLs adopted in the state, including the Shelter Island Yacht Basin TMDL that Sam spoke about. That's in the San Diego region, and it was approved by the State Board in 2005. Both the Marina del Rey and the Shelter Island copper TMDLs name individual boat owners and the anchorages that lease slips to the boat owners. Both TMDLs identify several potential implementation tools, but don't specify which tool will be used to implement the TMDL. And both TMDLs apply the California Toxics Rule as the appropriate copper criterion for the numeric target. The next key point is that TMDLs are required to identify the various sources of pollution, assign a load allocation for those sources, and identify parties responsible for actions to achieve those allocations. The requirement to name these parties is found in California Water Code Section 13242 and the State Water Board's Impaired Waters Policy. This TMDL assigns copper load allocations to boat owners, as well as the County of Los Angeles, who owns the harbor, and the individual anchorages within the harbor. Each of these entities contributes to and can control the discharge of dissolved copper in Marina del Rey Harbor. And in addition to the Shelter Island TMDL, which I just discussed, a few more examples of TMDL in the state that assign responsibility for load allocations are listed here. The Richardson Bay Pathogens TMDL in the San Francisco Bay region names boat owners and marina owners as implementing parties. The Shasta River Dissolved Oxygen TMDL and Temperature TMDL in the North Coast region names landowners and grazing activity managers as responsible parties. The Santa Maria Watershed Bacteria TMDL in the Central Coast names owners and operators of domestic animals or livestock as implementation parties. As responsible parties. The Cache Creek Mercury TMDL in Region 5, the Central Valley, identifies private landowners as implementation parties. And the Malibu Creek Bacteria TMDL in LA region names septic system owners and local agencies as responsible parties. And finally, multiple TMDLs throughout the state name agricultural landowners and operators. Another key issue is that the anchorages in Marina del Rey who haven't been regulated before believe that they are not appropriately named in the TMDL. The Los Angeles Water Board found that the anchorages are accountable for discharges of copper for the following reasons. The anchorages hold a real property interest in the land and water of the harbor and the land surrounding the harbor through their lease from the County of Los Angeles. The anchorages lease individual slips to boat owners. The boats docked at the anchorages leach copper into the water. The density of the boats docked at the anchorages contributes to the high concentrations of copper in the water. And finally, anchorages can exercise some control over boat owners by way of conditional leases or other agreements. Anchorages are also concerned about the consequences of being identified in a TMDL. In response to this concern, I will point out that a TMDL is not self-implementing and does not by itself impose any enforceable legal liability. When the Los Angeles Water Board establishes the regulatory action to implement this TMDL, it will establish requirements specific to the anchorages and the other named parties. But some potential,
And when you do that,
yeah,
they do have a chance to petition
yes,
to us.
they do. It's a whole separate public comment process. Some potential requirements of the regulatory action could include educating boaters about hull cleaning BMPs, alternative anti-fouling paints, and grants available to fund those paint conversions. They could require hull cleaners to show evidence of BMP training before they can work within the anchorages. Monitoring for and prohibiting visible paint plumes from the hull cleaning activities. Monitoring and reporting on the types of anti-fouling paints used within the anchorages. Providing incentives to boat owners who use alternative non-toxic coatings, maybe in sublease agreements for the slips, such as giving them waitlist priority, and requiring certification of use of low leaching or non-toxic coatings as part of the sublease application process or renewal process. We thought of these because marinas and yacht clubs in San Diego are already implementing many of these implementation actions as part of the Shelter Island Yacht Basin TMDL.
Question on that. At Shelter Island, was that something that was eventually imposed by the board, or did the stakeholders come together there and develop, say, an MOU or some sort of tool?
A little bit of both. The San Diego Regional Board issued an investigatory order to the Port of San Diego, and the Port of San Diego has both voluntarily and in response to that order created a program in coordination with the marinas in the port to implement those actions.
And the regional board adopted it? Is that how?
The regional board did not approve or adopt it as far as I know. At this point, the approach is still voluntary in San Diego.
So that could happen here too.
That could happen here too.
Interesting.
The next key issue is that there are multiple implementation options. Many commenters have expressed concern that the TMDL bans copper paint, but it doesn't. It merely requires a reduction in the leaching of copper paint from the boat to the water column. This reduction could be achieved in a number of ways that are listed on this slide. Boaters can convert their hull paint to a non-toxic paint in conjunction with hull cleaning activities to remove the buildup of anti-fouling organisms. Boaters can convert to a very low leaching copper paint. Hull cleaners can implement BMPs when cleaning boats with copper-based paint to ensure that less copper is discharged to the water column. Boaters can install slip liners around their boats to prevent copper paint from coming into contact with the marina water. Boaters could consider dry docking their boats or using boat lifts to keep the boats away from the water and anti-fouling organisms. And finally, boaters can apply integrated pest management to deal with anti-fouling organisms in a way that's best suited to their type of boat use. Not all of these options are practical or feasible for every boater, and most must be used in conjunction with one another to be effective at preventing anti-fouling organisms. The Los Angeles Water Board has committed to advocating for grant funds to offset the costs of these implementation measures. For example, the Los Angeles Water Board recently named paint conversions in Marina del Rey as a preferred project on the 2015 Clean Water Act Section 319 grant funding. The RFP for this funding went out in August of this year, and we have been working with the County of Los Angeles on their application, which is due in 2 days. The LA Water Board engaged in extensive outreach prior
Sorry,
to...
before you
Yeah.
go into outreach, I appreciate it. You may have touched on this, Executive Officer Unger, but Could you comment qualitatively on the relative magnitude of the sources of hull cleaning of copper to the harbor versus leaching from boat holes? I mean, we're talking about two different
Right.
pathways to the water column. You know, are we talking similar order of magnitude based on conceptual models, or is one maybe more significant than the other?
One order of magnitude difference. The TMDL found that the hull cleaning contributes to 6% of the loading, and passive leaching just from the boats sitting in the water is 94%. But there have been ongoing studies in San Diego, in the port of San Diego, where they're finding that the hull cleaning BMPs are effective at reducing the copper in the water column. So the initial TMDL source assessment found that the majority of it is passive leaching, but that's not to say that the hull cleaning BMPs won't be of use, and we might revise the TMDL in the future.
That's a good answer. I appreciate the sort of the two lines of evidence answer there, because you know, on the one hand, you have a conceptual model based on best available science, but then you also have the empirical evidence from the San Diego experience. So it tells me that we're in the same kind of ballpark.
Okay, good.
Yeah, but I think that's a good answer. Thanks.
And just to clarify, it's my understanding that hull cleaning can contribute to the future passive leaching of copper into the water because of basically now the paint's exposed.
Exactly.
Okay.
Right.
Yes.
So it is related. Okay.
Okay, so I'll go over outreach, and then I'll get to our proposed resolution findings. So before our regional board meeting, in addition to the legally required noticing requirements, the Water Board participated in over 20 outreach meetings that are listed on this slide. We sent a direct mail fact sheet to boat owners and created flyers to distribute to and post to our website with information about the TMDL. The Los Angeles Water Board revised the TMDL in response to comments from the boating community. For example, we added initial 2-year voluntary compliance period before we developed that regulatory action. And I'll now move on to the outreach that we've conducted since our regional board adopted the TMDL. We have participated in meetings with the County of Los Angeles, paint manufacturers, the Marina Lessees Association, and the boating community. And efforts by these responsible parties to implement the TMDL have already begun. For example, the County of Los Angeles Board of Supervisors recently voted to designate $4 million to TMDL implementation.
That's great.
Okay, so now I will go over, okay. I forgot to send the revised presentation, so I will carefully go over the proposed resolution. I'm going to be going over changes to the draft State Board resolution since the resolution was attached to the agenda and publicly noticed when the agenda was sent out.
Okay.
Just to clarify the events, essentially, the requirements are that we have the matter before you 10 days ahead, certainly for public public notice. What we're really talking about now is changes to that language and the discussions over the last 10 days that we've had with all of the stakeholders.
Okay.
Okay. So this first finding here, we added in response to meetings with the Lessees Association. Legal counsel met with them, and this language was included in a chain sheet that was circulated and distributed yesterday. But subsequent to that chain sheet, the Lessees Association has asked that this language be removed, and so staff is now proposing to strike this language, and that revision is shown in the chain sheet that was given to you today and put on the table in the back of the room.
All right. This was intended to be helpful, but they didn't feel
it didn't help.
I read it as helpful, but they didn't feel it was helpful. So since they didn't feel it was helpful, you're proposing to take it out.
That's right.
All right. All right.
Okay. So then the next,
Do you have that latest version? Because there's some, the change sheet 2. You have that?
Yes, they have it.
Okay, good.
I'm sure I have that.
okay, so just to be clear, the previous slide, that language is not to be included in the draft resolution. Okay, this slide,
That was whereas 6
that was whereas 6.
on your change sheet.
This slide shows finding number 7.
Okay.
It was included in the
Change sheet
change
2.
sheet that was circulated yesterday. It is intended to clarify the connection between DPR's efforts to regulate copper in anti-fouling paints and this TMDL revision. So this language was included in both the change sheet from yesterday and this morning.
It's now the new number 6.
Correct.
Yes. 7 before you, but will be 6.
6 version 2.
I do believe there were 2 finding number 7s. Thank you, Janine. I'm sorry about that. Okay. All right. The next slide shows new finding number 8. This explains the process for TMDL implementation and how and when the regulatory requirements will be developed.
Or this is to clarify that.
Yes, this is to
Question that we
clarify
talked
that
about.
question.
Okay.
And the language in the change sheet, this slide shows the language in the change sheet from yesterday. The change sheet this morning will strike the second sentence that reads, "The TMDL for toxic pollutants in Marina del Rey Harbor has been established through such a basin plan amendment." That was in response to the Lessees Association request, and we don't feel that it changes the intent of the finding at all.
It's interesting, you know, the language on this, you could put in any TMDL resolution.
Yeah.
It's,
But I think it was intended just to clarify that commitment, but again, if
Yeah.
it doesn't make it comfortable for them.
no, and it's transparency in the process, you know. I don't have any problem
Okay.
describing this.
Okay, the next new finding number 10 was included in the change sheet yesterday, and it was intended to clarify what it meant to assign load allocations. As I talked about before, some stakeholders had concerns that this would expose them to legal or financial liability, or that it held the same meaning as under CERCLA. So this finding was added to address that concern. And again, in response to feedback from the Lessees Association yesterday afternoon, we have a new change sheet this morning that would strike the last 2 sentences of this finding.
Okay.
The language that begins further, future regulatory actions, and then goes through to the end. So, and again, we don't feel that it changes the meaning of the finding at all. So we are okay with that.
Okay.
Okay, the next 2 findings. Let's see. Yeah. They clarify the Los Angeles Water Board's commitment to consider new scientific information during